Welcome back to another Small Bore and More. Today we've got something we've been wanting to do for ages, and now the 2022 Monkey, it's already got the DNA Stage 3 kit, it's got the over-racing exhaust, it's got a bespoke tune from Dynajet UK using their PowerVision 3, and to be fair, it goes really well. Now, we're not trying to make the Monkey something it isn't. We love Monkeys in stock form as well, they're great bikes, but we just love tweaking them too. So the next kind of logical thing was to look for a bit more power with the big bore kit. And when you're used to riding bigger bikes, it would be nice to kind of, be able to ride at road speeds, 60, 65 mile an hour, without having to worry about holding traffic up when you start going up a bit of an incline. And also, I guess, not look like an absolute psychopath tucked in like Marc Marquez when you're trying to pass a car. Now, the older versions of this bike, the JBO2, they could be increased to 181 without much hassle really. It's a pretty common conversion when people start looking for power increases. But unfortunately, the 2021 onwards, the JBO3, they have a slightly different design. And because of the kind of narrower head spacing of the studs, you can't quite get a 181. Now, there are a few kits on the market at the moment. There's the DHM 149 kit from the USA. There's a Takagawa 145 kit from Japan. And then there's also the Kitaco 145 kit. And as we're in the UK, we decided to go for the Kitaco kit purely because of the support you can get from the UK distributor, Ben's Bikes. Now, if you haven't come across Ben Harman, which I'll be very surprised about, you can check out his website. I'll put a link in the description. But his backup and customer service is second to none. And that's what you need when you're embarking on stuff like this, especially if you're like me and this is the first one you've done. So I'll put a link in the description to his site and the kit we're using. You can track it down yourself. Speak to Ben about it. He'll give you all the advice you need. Anyway, we're going to show you step by step how we install this kit. And if that's something you'd like to see, keep watching. And something else to mention, after we've run it in, we'll be taking it back down to Dynajet UK to get the fueling dialed in. So if you want this kit on your bike, you can just contact them directly, get the maps emailed to you. So subscribe to our channel so you don't miss that video. But for now, let's get the bike stripped down and let's see what's involved in installing a big bore kit on a little bike. So first thing we need to do is remove the air intake. Now, we have the DNA Stage 3 kit on this bike, but even with the standard air intake on, you'll need to remove the airbox. So if you want to see how that's done, check out our installation video for the DNA kit and you'll see how to remove a standard airbox. And of course, we need to remove the exhaust as well, at least the header pipe, which is a big benefit of having the over racing RSR fitted. It's just two springs connecting the header to the end can and then two 12mm nuts for the header itself. With the exhaust off, just drop the oil. Lambda or O2 sensor is next, which needs unplugged, but you don't need to remove the sensor itself, just the bash guard that's secured to the barrel. Similar on the left hand side of the engine, the oil temp sensor has a small bash guard that needs removed. Because we need to remove the stator side of the engine, it's easier to disconnect the cable and you can lift it right off the bike. It's a bit fiddly to get out because the wires are tightly packed in, but take your time, work the cable free and you'll be fine. After that, we want to disconnect everything off the throttle body. In hindsight, could have probably left the fuel line attached, but everything's just a simple push to release. So one small tube and then everything else just pulls off to disconnect everything. Then, to get access to the bolts that secure the throttle body to the head, you need to remove the plastic cable clamp cover. But once that's out of the way, undo the two bolts and simply lift it upwards. Then all we done was cable tie it up out of the way. Remove the valve covers by loosening the two bolts on each. We have the G-Craft billet covers installed on this bike and they use a 5mm Allen key, but the standard covers, they just use a standard 8mm socket. When removing the lower cover, be ready to catch the oil that will escape. As you can see, I wasn't. Okay, so back to the left hand side of the bike, to remove the stator cover. These are all the same length, 8mm bolts. However, some have little brackets for holding the engine temp sensor and side stand wiring, so just make note of which ones they come out of. The cover itself just slides off, but it does take a little bit of effort to overcome the force of the magnets in the assembly. Remove the 2 bolts for the cam gear cover. Again, if yours is stock, it'll be 2 8mm bolts. This is the outside the box or OTB version 3 cover. It comes off in the same way. We then need to get the engine to top dead centre by turning the flywheel anti-clockwise by hand until the little circle on the cam gear lines up with the bump on the casting, while at the same time the horizontal line on the flywheel lines up with the bump on the casing. When those 2 things happen, the engine's at top dead centre. Okay, the next thing we need to do is release the tension on the cam chain, and we do this by removing the 5mm Allen bolt, which is at about 5 o'clock position just below the flywheel. This just lets the oil run out, which releases the cam chain tensioner pulley and makes it much easier to get the cam gear off and back on again. Now that's done, we want to loosen the cam gear bolt. The proper way is to use a cam gear holder like this, but I've seen plenty of people use an impact wrench. You just need to make sure it doesn't move off top dead centre. With the bolt out, just lift out the cam gear. For the next bit, you're better off with a tappet adjuster wrench like this one from Kitaco. It allows you to undo the locking nut and adjust the valve clearance and tighten everything back up with one tool. For now though, we're just using it to wind everything out to give us as much clearance as possible to get the stock cam out, and repeat the process for the exhaust valve. Then remove the bolt that secures the cam. To remove the cam, we reinserted the cam gear bolt to give us something more substantial to pull on. Then, as it starts to come out, turn it anti-clockwise and clockwise and you'll find it just pulls out. With the cam out, next thing is to loosen the cam chain guide pulley shaft. We loosened it and removed it here, however the instructions say just to loosen it at this point. Probably so it's easier to grab later, however it didn't cause us any issues. Next, you need to evenly loosen the 2-cylinder head flange bolts. Then move on to the 4 head nuts, again loosening them evenly. Don't worry if it feels like the studs rotating, they do eventually come loose, plus we'll be checking the studs later. Whip off the head bolt washers and then just slide the head off the engine. Remove the old gasket and fish out the cam chain guide wheel. Then remove the cam chain guide. Slide the 125cc barrel off the studs. At this point, we put a cloth over the studs to support the piston and stop the conrod hitting the edge of the engine casing. Plus, put a bit of paper towel in to stop anything unwanted going in there by accident. Then prise out the wrist pin retaining clip and throw that away. They're not to be reused. Push out the wrist pin and lift the piston off the conrod. Okay, so let's open the 145 kit from Kitaco, see what comes in the kit. Right, we've got the new 145 barrel, which looks really nice. Integrated all cooler feed banjos on the side. Nice touch if you're not using their clutch cover. The piston itself, slightly larger in diameter than the stock. The high performance cam, allowing the valves to remain open for a bit longer to help get the air and fuel in and the exhaust gases out. You'll notice there's no decompression lobes on the new cam, so it might be a little harder to start with the stock starter, but I guess we'll see. And also in the kit are all the gaskets you need and a new wrist pin and retaining clips. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is make sure we address any loosening of the studs. This requires 2 M7 nuts, and luckily these are supplied in the kit, which I didn't realise until I spent ages searching my nut and bolt archive for an M7. They just don't seem to exist. Anyway, it's not an issue because they're supplied. So using them, feed one on, then the next, and lock them together by turning in opposing directions. Then using a torque wrench, tighten them back up to 7.5 Newton meters. I was really surprised how far some of these had wound out, so guessing this is quite an important step. With those retorqued, it's on to gapping the piston rings. Now, to do this, Kitaco recommend using a formula based on the size of the barrel's bore. So I'm measuring the barrel a few times and getting an average. You don't need to measure it more than once, but it's easier to spot a mistake if you do. As my dad used to say, measure twice, cut once. Now, for some reason, most people talk in thousandths of an inch for ring gaps. So we'll convert our average size in millimeters to inches, which gives us 2.115 inches. Each ring has a different formula to calculate the required gap. So the top ring, which is the grey silver one, has a following formula for the smallest gap, which is bore size multiplied by 0.0045, and the formula for the largest gap is bore size multiplied by 0.0050. So using our 2.115 of an inch bore size, the smallest ring gap can be 0.0095 or 9.5 thousandths of an inch, and the largest the ring gap can be is 0.0105 or 10.5 thousandths of an inch. So we're going to aim for 10 thousandths of an inch. The second ring, or lower of the two rings, which is black, has its own formula which creates a slightly larger gap. So bore size multiplied by 0.005 for the lower end, and bore size multiplied by 0.0055 for the higher end. So taking our bore size, we get 10.5 thousandths of an inch to 11.6 thousandths of an inch. So we'll aim for 11 for the second ring. Too small, and when they heat up, the ring will expand and the gap won't be big enough to allow for the expansion, and the ring's nowhere to go but to push harder against the barrel, which creates even more heat, and before you know it, your engine's dead. Too big of a gap and you end up with combustion gases escaping past the ring seal and ultimately a reduction in power. So getting the gaps correct is critical. In the pack of rings, we've got the top ring, the second ring, a corrugated O-ring and two thin scraper rings. The way to check the ring gap is to insert it into the barrel and use a piston to push it into the barrel, which ensures it's sitting square. Then take a feeler gauge to measure the gap. For us, a 10th thou wouldn't look at it, a 9 was too tight, and an 8 was the first one to go in, so we needed to open it up a bit. There are a few ways you can do this, but the correct way is with a ring grinder, and they're not expensive. I'll put a link in the description to this one, which was off Amazon. The key here is to go slow and take a little bit off at a time. You can always take it out and grind it some more, but you can't put it back on if you grind it too much. So in total, we've done 12 turns to take it to a slack 9 or a tight 10. So we're happy with that. On to the second. Right away it was a slack 11 and a tight 12, so in spec out of the box. Next thing we need to do is put the rings onto the piston. So starting with the O-rings, wiper ring, corrugated ring and then another wiper ring. And all the gaps need to be about 10mm away from each other. It doesn't matter which way you put these on, however it does matter for the main rings. The main rings have a TK etched on them, and this goes to the top of the piston. With the rings in position, it's now a good time to insert one of the wrist pin retaining clips, which saves you having to do both of them on the bike. Just make sure that the gap in the retaining clip doesn't line up with the opening in the piston. thoroughly oil the piston, the rings and the barrel. If you're going to be starting the engine pretty much after assembly, then standard oil's fine. If it's going to be a while before you're going to fire it up, you might want to consider using engine assembly lube. So with everything oiled, the next thing to do is orientate the ring gaps. Basically, you want the gaps evenly spaced from each other, so 120 degrees apart. With the ring gaps in the correct place, we found it easier to get the piston into the barrel while it's on the bench. Make sure the side of the piston marked EX is orientated down when it's on the bike. Leave the piston exposed enough to be able to slide the wrist pin in. Okay, so before introducing the new barrel, we need to make sure the gasket surface is clean and change out the dowels for the supplied ones. So slide the old ones off and the new ones on, and make sure they're seated into the engine casing. The instructions suggest using a liquid gasket against the mating surface where the two halves of the engine casing meet, just to ensure there's no leakage. And it doesn't need a lot. And if you look at the amount of liquid gasket on from the factory, you'll kind of get the idea. So put a little on the top joint and a little on the bottom joint. With that done, slide the fresh gasket into place and add some oil to the top of the conrod. Slide the barrel down the studs. Again, it's a good idea to block off the opening to the bottom end in case that retaining clip springs off while you're trying to insert it. Insert the new wrist pin and then secure that with the retaining clip. With the piston and wrist pin locked in place, slide the barrel all the way down into position. At this point, we need to refit the cam chain guide rail, and the instructions recommend using a new copper washer. They're a couple of quid from Honda, so you might as well put a new one on. Next, insert the two supplied dowels. The OEM ones will probably be stuck in the head, so make sure you remove them. Reinsert the plastic cam chain guide, put the new head gasket on, then slide the standard head back into position. The instructions call for you to oil the threads of the studs, basically to ensure you get the correct torque values transferred to the head. Refit the washers and the head bolts. And evenly tighten them up in an alternating diagonal pattern to a final torque of 18 Newton meters. Refit the final two cylinder head flange bolts, evenly tighten them and torque those to 10 Newton meters. Now's the point to torque the cam chain guide roller bolt, that's also 10 Newton meters. So onto the cam. You want to make sure it's got a good covering of oil. And insertion is just the reverse of removal, turning one way and then the next until it's seated flush within the casing. Then use the bolt and the retaining washer to secure the cam, torquing it to 10 Newton meters. Now we need to check the engine is at top dead centre, so we rotate the flywheel counterclockwise again to the horizontal mark as it was before we started to dismantle the engine. Refit the cam gear again, making sure the circle on the gear is in the top dead centre position. Torque to 27 Newton meters. The next step is to prime the hydraulic cam chain tensioner by syringing 4 cc's of standard engine oil into the chamber where we removed the bolt from earlier. Then quickly reinserting the bolt, torquing to 10 Newton meters. With that done, we are on to adjusting the valve clearances. So with the 0.08mm feeler gauge, use the valve adjuster tool to set the clearance and tighten the lock nut. Recheck, torque to 9Nm and check again. Same with the exhaust valve, using a 0.2mm feeler gauge. Torque up, again 9Nm. It's always good to check it again after you've torqued it. Refit the valve covers, making sure you don't mix them up, as the top one has an integrated oil feed route. Torque to 9Nm. Refit the cam gear cover with a little application of oil around the O-ring, and again torque to 9Nm. Refit the stator cover, torque those bolts to 10Nm. Refit the bash guards for the temp sensor and the O2 sensor, again 10Nm. Refit the throttle body gasket and the throttle body connections. I'm up for 12Nm for the two flanged bolts. Refit your airbox. Reconnect the temp sensor and stator cables. Put your side cover back on. Torque the sump to 24Nm and refill the oil. Refit the exhaust header pipe, and it's nearly time to see if she starts. Okay, so that's a 145 built. Will she start? Will she run? I'm actually really nervous about this. My heart's pounding. Think it'll start? Let's see. No bother. She sounds really nice. Good effort. Happy with that. Well, I'm really pleased with that. I don't know whether you can tell. I'm going to give it a few heat cycles, check the nut and bolt torque, get some miles on the engine before we go back down to Dynajet to see what horsepower it's making. Then we'll get some footage of it out on the road and give you some real life examples of acceleration and top speed. Now, most people don't want to miss that. So if you're not already subscribed, now's a great time. Until then, it's all from Small Bore and More. We'll catch you on the next one. Take care.